Cynthia Parsons, your San Antonio real estate consultant. In the last video, I talked about page 1 of the buyer representation agreement. Be sure to go back to my website if you did not watch it or the other videos that cover the new NAR rules before watching this one. Now this week I am going to delve into paragraph 7, brokers' commissions, on page 2 and 3 of the buyer representation agreement. Now the most important takeaway from this section is that broker compensation or the sharing of compensation between brokers is not set by law, nor fixed, controlled, or recommended or suggested by the Association of Realtors, MLS, or any other listing service out there. In fact, broker compensation is and has always been fully negotiable. Brokers independently determine their fees, and they are prohibited from receiving compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amounts stated in this agreement. Now, it is important to note that if the compensation amount differs from what the contract states, there are forms that can be utilized to amend the compensation amount if required. Now, paragraph 7A1, broker's fee, is where the buyer, client, and agent discuss the agent's fee for their services in the event the seller chooses not to offer the buyer agent's compensation. Now, this can be stated as a percentage or flat fee. A2 applies to leases. 7B is sharing that the buyer agent will first seek to obtain payment from the seller or the seller's agent. If none of them are willing or fail to pay the broker, then you as a client will be responsible for the fees. Now, before we move to 7C, I want to talk about our team and what we cover with buyers during our buyer consultation. Let's say you as the buyer client want to see 5 homes. Note that you have already signed this agreement, as agents must have a signed agreement before they can show homes to buyers. Now, before scheduling the showings, as your real estate consultant, I will call all the listing agents to see what, if anything, the seller is paying towards commission. Once I have this information, I will review it with you, and you can make the decision if you still want to see all 5 homes or just the ones that will cover my fee, so you don't have that financial burden. Or you can decide to see all of the homes regardless of compensation, and if you want to make an offer, you could include the request that the seller cover my compensation. You know, in the end, everything is negotiable, so always keep that in mind. 7C discusses that the client is not obligated to pay a broker a commission until such time as the broker's commission is earned and payable. Now, it then goes on to define what this means. So, broker's compensation is earned when, number 1, the client enters into a contract to buy or lease property in the market area, or 2, the client breaches the agreement. Now, it further explains that a broker's compensation is payable either during the term of this agreement or after it ends, upon earlier of, number 1, the closing of the transaction to acquire the property, or 2, the client's breach of the contract to buy or lease a property in the market area, or the client's breach of this agreement. Now, the last sentence in this section states if a client ends up buying more than one property under this agreement, that commission is earned and payable on all properties that were purchased by that buyer. Now, 7D talks about the acquisition of one of the broker's listings. Basically, it states that if a client acquires a property that's listed by the broker will be paid in accordance with the terms of the listing agreement, and the seller and client will have no obligation to pay the brokerage. 7E1 and 2 discusses additional compensation in addition to the compensation agreed upon under 7A. For example, there may be a seller, builder, landlord, or service provider offering to pay an agent additional compensation. In this case, the agent is entitled to accept that commission. 7F discusses the protection period the agent is given if the buyer chooses to terminate the contract with the broker. It states that no later than 10 days after the agreement ends, the broker may send the client written notice identifying the properties called to the client's attention during the agreement. If the client or relative of the client agrees to acquire a property identified in that notice during the protection period, the client will pay the broker upon closing the same amount the broker would have been entitled to receive as if the agreement was still in effect. Now, this is really important because if you sign a buyer representation agreement with a broker for just one day and see 5 properties, and then you decide to purchase one of those properties, you could still be responsible for having to pay the buyer's agent commission to that agent. Now, paragraph 7F also states that this does not apply if the client is bound under another buyer representation agreement with another broker who is a member of the Texas Realtors at the same time the acquisition is negotiated and the other broker is paid a fee for negotiating the transaction. 7G talks about escrow authorization, and essentially what this means is that you consent to allow the title company to disperse funds, including all amounts payable to the broker when a transaction is complete. And finally, 7H refers to the county in which the broker will be paid in. So that was a lot of information to digest. Now remember, I am here to answer all of your questions, and if I don't have the answer, I will get you with someone who can. Now next time, I will cover the rest of the buyer representation agreement, which will arm you with the information you need to start your home purchase journey.